The stagecoach rattled to a stop in Alpine, Texas, and Charlotte Oliver stepped down into the blistering heat of 1875 with her heart hammering against her ribs. She clutched a small leather satchel containing everything she owned, including her mother's shears, which would soon change her life forever. But she had no idea just how much. "Last stop, Alpine," the driver called, tossing her trunk down with zero ceremony before cracking his whip. Charlotte stood alone on the wooden boardwalk, squinting at the dusty town stretched before her. This place was her final hope, her last chance at survival. Because 3 months ago, after her father died, the creditors had taken everything. The family ranch in Missouri, the livestock, even most of her mother's keepsakes. All that remained was a letter, not from her brother Samuel, who'd headed west 2 years prior to make his fortune, but about him. His employer, a cattle baron named Jenkins, had written to inform her that Samuel had been killed in a flash flood while crossing the Pecos River during a cattle drive. The letter also mentioned that her brother's wages would be paid to his next of kin upon their arrival in Alpine. Charlotte brushed the dust from her dark blue traveling dress and straightened her shoulders. The money was crucial, but she needed more than that. She needed work. At 22, Charlotte had spent her entire life on a ranch. She knew cattle, knew horses, knew the rhythm of the land. But as she glanced at the weathered faces of the men lounging outside the saloon, she understood one brutal truth. No cattle outfit would hire a woman for a drive. That's when the idea had come to her on the stagecoach. Samuel and she had always looked alike. Same chestnut hair, same amber eyes, same square jaw. With her hair shorn and the right clothing, she could become Charlie. She could claim to be her own cousin, come to collect Samuel's wages and find work with the same outfit. But what she didn't know was that this deception would lead her straight into the arms of the most dangerous man on the trail. Dangerous not because he was cruel, but because he would see right through her disguise. A young boy approached her, no more than 12. "Miss, need help with that trunk?" Charlotte handed him a penny. "Do you know where I might find Mr. Jenkins?" "Yes, ma'am. He's probably at his office right now, just down the street past the Mercantile. Has a big sign that says Circle J Cattle Company on it." Charlotte thanked him and made her way down the dusty street. Alpine was larger than she'd expected. A general store, a barber shop, 2 saloons, and even a small hotel spoke of prosperity brought by the cattle trade. When she reached the Circle J office, she took a deep breath and straightened her dress one final time. This would be her last appearance as Charlotte Oliver. By tomorrow, Charlie Oliver would be looking for work on a cattle drive. The bell jangled as she pushed open the door. A clerk looked up from his ledger, eyebrows raised at seeing a woman enter. "May I help you, miss?" "I'm here to see Mr. Jenkins. I'm Charlotte Oliver, Samuel Oliver's sister." The clerk's expression shifted to sympathy. "Oh, Miss Oliver, we've been expecting you. Please have a seat. I'll fetch Mr. Jenkins right away." She sat stiffly, her gloved hands clutched tightly in her lap. The office smelled of tobacco, leather, and paper. Maps of Texas adorned the walls with cattle trails marked in red ink. She studied them carefully, knowing one of those trails would soon be her path, if her plan worked. "Miss Oliver." A tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair entered the room. "I'm Harvey Jenkins. I was deeply sorry to hear of your journey out here under such circumstances. Your brother was a fine hand." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she said, shaking his hand firmly. Jenkins moved behind the desk and opened a drawer. Samuel was well liked by the other men, worked hard, never caused trouble. He placed a small pouch on the desk. "This is what he earned on his last drive, plus the month he worked at the ranch before that." Charlotte took the pouch, feeling the weight of the coins inside. "Thank you. I wonder if I might ask about something else." Of course. My brother mentioned in his letters that you would be organizing another cattle drive soon. I was hoping—" Jenkins was already shaking his head before she could finish. "Miss Oliver, I understand your situation may be difficult, but a cattle drive is no place for a lady. It's months of hard, dangerous work. We sleep on the ground, cross rivers, face storms, and sometimes deal with rustlers or hostile tribes. I grew up on a ranch, Mr. Jenkins. I know cattle. I can ride as well as any man." His expression was kind but firm. "I don't doubt your abilities, Miss Oliver, but it simply isn't done. The men wouldn't. It wouldn't be proper." He hesitated. "If you're looking for work, Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house might need help, or perhaps the hotel." Charlotte forced a polite smile. "I'll consider that. Thank you again for your time." As she left the office, the pouch of coins felt heavy in her hand. It would sustain her for a while, but not forever. And the thought of working as a maid or cook held no appeal. Her decision was made. If Charlotte Oliver couldn't join the drive, Charlie Oliver would. The barber shop was empty when she entered. The barber looked up from his newspaper with surprise. "Afternoon, miss. Looking for your husband or father?" "No," Charlotte said firmly. "I need a haircut, a very short haircut." The barber blinked in confusion. "But miss, your hair is, well, it's lovely. Ladies don't typically—" She placed a coin on the counter. "Please, it's important." Reluctantly, the barber gestured to the chair. As she sat, he asked, "How short were you thinking?" "Like a man's," she said simply. His eyebrows shot up. "You sure about this, miss?" "Absolutely." As the shears snipped away, Charlotte watched her chestnut locks fall to the floor. Each cut seemed to take her further from the life she had known and closer to the one she was choosing. By the time the barber was finished, her reflection showed a different person, a young man with short, neatly trimmed hair that accentuated her strong jawline and high cheekbones. "Thank you," she said, rising from the chair. She felt lighter, both physically and somehow in spirit. Her next stop was the general store where she purchased men's clothing, sturdy denim trousers, cotton shirts, a vest, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. The shopkeeper raised his eyebrows but asked no questions when she claimed they were for her ill brother. At the small hotel, she paid for a room for the night. Once alone, Charlotte stripped off her dress and corset with a sense of liberation. She bound her chest tightly with strips of cloth, wincing at the discomfort but satisfied with the flattened appearance. The men's clothes fit reasonably well. She had always been tall and lean. When she donned the hat and studied herself in the small mirror, Charlie Oliver looked back at her. She practiced lowering her voice, broadening her stance, and adopting the loose-limbed walk she'd observed in cowboys on her father's ranch. By morning, she felt ready. But she had no idea that the most dangerous part of her plan was about to begin. The Circle J ranch lay 3 miles outside of town. Charlotte, now Charlie, walked the distance, her new boots rubbing blisters on her heels. She'd left her trunk at the hotel storage room, carrying only a small pack with essential items. Her plan was simple: present herself as Samuel Oliver's cousin, come to Texas after hearing of his death, looking for work with the same outfit. The ranch was larger than she expected, a sprawling complex of buildings centered around a main house, with bunkhouses, barns, corrals, and outbuildings spread across the property. Men moved purposefully about their tasks, barely glancing her way as she approached. She spotted Jenkins speaking with a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy near the main corral. The cowboy's back was to her, but something about his stance, the easy confidence, the way other men deferred to him, suggested authority. The trail boss, perhaps. As she approached, Jenkins glanced her way with no recognition in his eyes. Good. The disguise was working. "Excuse me," she said, careful to keep her voice low. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm looking for work. I heard you're putting together a drive soon." Jenkins studied her for a moment. "We might be. You have experience with cattle?" "Yes, sir. Worked my cousin's ranch in Missouri for years. Name's Charlie Oliver." At this, both men seemed to pay closer attention. The cowboy turned fully toward her, and Charlotte found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a tanned, weathered face beneath a shock of dark blonde hair. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster, as if he could see right through her disguise. "Oliver," Jenkins said. "Any relation to Samuel Oliver? Lost him on the last drive." "He was my cousin, sir. That's why I'm here. Got word of his passing and thought I might find work with the same outfit." Jenkins looked thoughtful, while the blue-eyed cowboy continued to study her face. She fought the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. "This is Wade Oakley, my trail boss," Jenkins finally said. "Wade, what do you think?" "We're still short a few hands for the drive." Wade Oakley stepped closer, and Charlotte forced herself to stand her ground, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the fluttering in her stomach. He was tall. She had to tilt her chin up slightly to maintain eye contact, and had the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his life in the saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly raspy. "Since before I could walk." "Rope?" "Yes, sir." "Shoot?" "Well enough." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see. Follow me." Charlotte followed Wade Oakley to the corral, where several horses milled about. He pointed to a spirited-looking bay gelding. "That's Diablo. Nobody's been able to ride him for more than a minute. Get on him, stay on for 2, and you've got a job." She heard a few chuckles from the cowboys who had gathered to watch. Jenkins frowned. "Wade, maybe something a little less—" "No," Charlotte interrupted. "I'll do it." If she was going to be one of them, she needed to prove herself now. But what she didn't realize was that this test would change everything. She studied the bay horse carefully. He was beautiful, muscular and proud, with intelligent eyes that seemed to be sizing her up. She climbed the corral fence and dropped down inside. The horse snorted and backed away, tossing his head. Charlotte took a slow, deep breath, then began speaking in a low, soothing tone as she approached. "Easy, boy. Easy now. You're a handsome fellow, aren't you?" She moved steadily closer, never breaking eye contact. When she reached him, she slowly raised a hand to his neck, stroking gently. One of the watching cowboys handed her a saddle and bridle over the fence. Charlotte continued murmuring to the horse as she prepared him, moving with deliberate, confident motions. When the horse was saddled, she grabbed the saddle horn and swung herself up in one fluid motion. For a moment, Diablo stood perfectly still. Then, with a furious snort, he exploded into action. The bay bucked and twisted, leaping into the air and coming down with jarring force. Charlotte clenched her thighs around the horse's barrel, gripping the saddle horn with one hand while keeping Diablo's head up with the other. She'd broken horses before on her father's ranch, but never one with this much spirit. Every muscle in her body screamed with effort as the horse continued his frenzied attempt to throw her. She lost her hat almost immediately, but kept her focus on staying centered, moving with the horse rather than fighting against him. Time seemed to stretch as Diablo bucked beneath her. She heard shouts from the men watching, but couldn't make out the words over the thunder of hooves and her own pounding heart. Finally, gradually, Diablo's movements began to slow. The violent bucking gave way to half-hearted hops, and then to an angry trot around the corral. Charlotte continued to speak soothingly to him, stroking his neck with one hand while maintaining firm control with the reins. When the horse finally stopped, sides heaving and coat dark with sweat, a cheer went up from the gathered cowboys. Charlotte looked up to see Wade Oakley watching her with an unreadable expression. She dismounted carefully, her legs trembling from exertion, and led Diablo to the fence where Wade stood. "That was more than 2 minutes," she said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. Wade nodded slowly. 8 minutes, actually. For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face. "Ever been on a cattle drive before?" "No, sir." "It's the hardest work you'll ever do. Long days, short nights, bad food, and worse weather." He studied her face again, and Charlotte felt a moment of panic. Could he tell? "Still want the job?" "More than anything." Wade glanced at Jenkins, who nodded his approval. "All right, Oliver, you're hired. We leave in 3 days." Charlotte felt a surge of triumph. She'd done it. She was officially part of the drive. Now she just had to maintain her disguise for the months ahead. But Wade Oakley's piercing blue eyes seemed to see too much, and Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that her secret wasn't as safe as she thought. The bunkhouse was a long, low building with rows of bunks lining the walls. When she entered, several men looked up from various activities, mending tack, playing cards, writing letters. Their expressions ranged from curious to indifferent. "New blood," one of them called out. "You the fella that rode Diablo?" "That's right," Charlotte said, keeping her voice low. "Charlie Oliver." A weathered cowboy with a thick mustache stood and offered his hand. "Tom Wheaton, that was some riding." She shook his hand firmly. "Just got lucky, I guess." "Luck my foot," another man said, laughing. "That was skill, and it sure put a smile on Wade's face. He's been trying to break that horse for weeks." Charlotte moved to an empty bunk and set her pack down. The reality of her situation suddenly hit her. She would be living, eating, and sleeping alongside these men for months. The privacy she'd taken for granted her entire life was now gone. "Mess hall's serving up supper soon," Tom said. "Chuck makes a decent stew when he's in a good mood. Just don't ask what's in it." The men laughed, and Charlotte found herself smiling along. As they filed out toward the mess hall, she hung back slightly, observing. These men moved with the easy camaraderie of those who had faced hardship together. The mess hall was filled with long tables, already crowded with ranch hands. Charlotte took a seat at the end of one bench beside Tom. As she reached for the ladle, a shadow fell across the table. Charlotte looked up to find Wade Oakley standing beside her. "Oliver," he said with a nod. "Got your bunk sorted?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Eat up. We're checking the herd at first light tomorrow. Want to see how you handle yourself with cattle." "I'll be ready." Wade studied her face for a moment longer than necessary, and Charlotte felt a flutter of anxiety. Did he suspect something? But he merely nodded again and moved on to speak with another group of men. Tom nudged her arm. "Boss doesn't usually take such an interest in new hands. Must have impressed him more than we thought." Charlotte shrugged, focusing on her stew to hide her discomfort. "Just want to do my part." But deep down, she knew that Wade Oakley was watching her more closely than anyone else, and that could either be her salvation or her destruction. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Charlotte worked from dawn until dusk, proving her skills with horses and cattle under Wade's watchful eye. She took care to maintain her disguise, binding her chest tightly each morning before the others woke, keeping her voice low, adopting the mannerisms of the men around her. She bathed in a creek well away from the ranch when everyone else was occupied, and changed clothes only in the darkness of night. If any of the men noticed her peculiarities, they didn't comment. Perhaps they assumed she was simply private by nature. Or perhaps the West had taught them not to inquire too deeply into another person's business. The night before the drive was set to begin, the atmosphere in the bunkhouse was charged with anticipation. Men cleaned guns, mended clothes, and packed their bedrolls with the efficiency of those who had done it many times before. Charlotte sat on her bunk, carefully inspecting her new saddle, a gift from Jenkins, who had explained that her cousin's saddle had been lost in the river when he died. She'd been touched by the gesture, even as she felt a pang of guilt at her deception. "First drive is always special," Tom said, sitting beside her. Over the past days, he had taken her under his wing, explaining the routines and offering advice. At nearly 50, he was one of the oldest cowboys in the outfit and commanded respect from the younger men. "I'm looking forward to it," Charlotte said honestly. 2,000 head of cattle, 600 miles to the railhead in Dodge City, Tom mused. "Be a long journey. Hope you're ready for it." "I am." Tom studied her for a moment. "You know, you remind me a bit of your cousin. Something about the eyes. Samuel was a good man, quiet like you, kept to himself mostly, but always did his share and more." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "He wrote home about the drive, made it sound like an adventure." "It is that," Tom agreed. "Also back-breaking work, danger and boredom all mixed together." He patted her shoulder. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow comes early." The drive began at dawn with cowboys moving among the milling herd, gradually urging them northward. Charlotte had been assigned to ride flank, keeping the cattle from straying too far to the side. It was exhausting, dusty work, but she found herself exhilarated by it. 2,000 living creatures moving across the vast landscape, guided by just 20 men on horseback. Wade rode up and down the line, his tall figure easily recognizable even at a distance. When he rode up alongside Charlotte late in the morning, she straightened in her saddle. "You're doing well," he said simply. "Keep your distance from that lead steer on the edge there. He's got a mean streak." "Yes, sir," she replied. Wade stayed beside her for a moment, watching as she turned a cow that was veering away from the herd. "Your cousin taught you well." "My father, actually, had a small spread in Missouri." "What happened to it?" Charlotte hesitated. "Creditors took it when he died. Couldn't make the payments after a bad year." Wade nodded sympathetically. "Hard country for ranching, Missouri. Too many people, not enough space." He gestured to the open plains stretching around them. "Out here, a man can breathe." "That's why I came," Charlotte said. "Well, you've got a good seat and a good head. Keep both, and you'll do fine." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and rode off. Charlotte watched him go, admiring the easy way he sat his horse. There was something compelling about Wade Oakley, a quiet strength that drew people to him. She found herself wanting his approval in a way that went beyond simply maintaining her disguise. And that was dangerous. The first week of the drive established a rhythm. Up before dawn, a quick breakfast, then into the saddle to get the herd moving. The days were long and dusty, the work constant. At night, the men took turns standing watch, rotating so each man got a few hours of sleep before his shift. Charlotte took her turns without complaint, though the lack of sleep wore on her. During these quiet hours, with only the stars and sleeping cattle for company, she sometimes allowed herself to wonder what would happen if her deception were discovered. On the 10th night of the drive, she was paired with Wade for the midnight watch. As they rode slowly around the perimeter of the herd, Charlotte found herself both nervous and oddly pleased to be in his company. They rode in companionable silence for nearly an hour before Wade spoke. "Your riding's improved," he said. "You've got a natural touch with the horses." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by the compliment. "It shows." He adjusted his hat, pushing it back slightly to reveal more of his face in the moonlight. "The men are taking to you well. Even Diablo seems fond of you now." Charlotte smiled at the mention of the bay gelding, who had indeed become almost affectionate toward her. He just needed someone to listen to him. Wade chuckled. That what your father taught you? To listen to horses? My mother, actually. She had a way with animals. Said they could tell who respected them and who didn't. Smart woman. He paused. She's still in Missouri. Charlotte shook her head. Died when I was 16. Fever took her. I'm sorry. His voice was gentle. Lost my own mother young, too. Makes a difference in a person's life. They rode on in silence. Charlotte stole glances at Wade's profile, strong and straight against the starlit sky. Why'd you become a trail boss? She asked suddenly. Wade considered the question. Wasn't planning on it. Started as a hand, same as you. But I found I had a knack for seeing the bigger picture, planning the route, anticipating problems, handling men. Jenkins noticed and gave me more responsibility. Been doing this 5 years now. You're good at it, Charlotte said honestly. The men respect you. He glanced at her with a half smile. Respect is earned out here. You're earning yours too, Charlie. Hearing him use her assumed name sent a strange pang through her chest. Part of her wanted to tell him the truth, to hear him say her real name. But that was impossible. Something on your mind? Wade asked, noticing her silence. Just thinking about the river crossing tomorrow, she lied. Tom says it can be tricky. Wade nodded. The Pecos is never easy. We'll need every hand alert and ready. His expression darkened slightly. That's where we lost your cousin last year. Flash flood came out of nowhere. Charlotte swallowed hard. I'll be careful. See that you are. He nudged his horse forward. Let's make another circuit. Storms brewing to the west. Don't like the look of those clouds. And Charlotte didn't like the growing feeling that her secret was becoming harder to keep, especially from Wade Oakley. The next morning brought confirmation of Wade's weather sense. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, and a restless wind blew across the plains as the herd approached the Pecos River. Charlotte could feel the tension among the men. River crossings were always dangerous, but with a storm threatening and the memory of Samuel's death hanging over them, this one carried special significance. Wade gathered the men before they reached the river, outlining his plan. Water's higher than I'd like, but we need to get across before that storm hits. Tom, you'll take point. Charlie, you and I will help push them in from behind. The rest of you split between flanks and swing positions. Keep them moving forward. Don't let them bunch up. Charlotte nodded along with the others, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. This would be her first river crossing, and the churning waters of the Pecos looked formidable. As the lead steers reached the water's edge, Tom began urging them forward. Cattle were naturally reluctant to enter water, and the first few balked, turning away. Tom persisted, and finally one bold steer stepped into the current, then another, and soon a steady stream of animals was making its way across. Charlotte rode behind the herd with Wade, keeping the stragglers moving forward. When they reached the riverbank, she saw the water was running fast, muddy and higher than usual from recent rains upstream. Stay close, Wade called over the noise of the cattle. If you get in trouble, let your horse have his head. They're better swimmers than we are. As they entered the water, Charlotte felt her horse tense beneath her, then begin swimming strongly. The current immediately tried to push them downstream, but the gelding fought against it. All around them, cattle were swimming, their nostrils flaring above the waterline. They were nearly halfway across when it happened. A steer ahead of them panicked, thrashing in the water and causing confusion among the nearby animals. Several turned back, swimming directly toward Charlotte and Wade. "Turn them!" Wade shouted, maneuvering his horse to intercept the panicking cattle. Charlotte did the same, but a large steer collided with her mount, sending them both sideways into the current. Her horse lost his footing on the river bottom, and suddenly they were being swept downstream, away from the crossing. "Charlie!" Wade's voice carried over the water as he turned his horse to follow. Charlotte fought to stay in the saddle as her horse struggled against the current. The weight of her water-soaked clothes dragged at her, and she could feel her disguise slipping, the binding around her chest loosening as it became saturated. Ahead she saw a fallen tree jutting into the river. "Left!" she shouted to her horse, pulling the reins. The animal responded, barely missing the tangle of branches, but the effort cost them momentum, and the current pushed them further downstream. She heard splashing behind her and turned to see Wade closing the distance, his powerful horse cutting through the water with determined strokes. When he reached her, Wade grabbed her horse's bridle with one hand, helping to guide both animals toward the shore. As they finally reached shallow water, Charlotte's horse stumbled and she pitched forward, losing her grip on the saddle. She fell face first into the river, the cold water shocking her system. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders, pulling her upright. "I've got you," Wade said, his voice close to her ear as he half carried her to the shore. They collapsed on the bank, both breathing heavily. Charlotte pushed her soaking hair back from her face, suddenly aware that her binding had completely loosened. Her shirt clung to her body, revealing the unmistakable curves she had so carefully hidden. Wade stared at her, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to realization. "You're a woman," he said, the words barely audible over the sound of the river. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, then met his gaze directly. "Yes." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the magnitude of her deception hanging between them. Wade's face was unreadable, a storm of emotions passing behind his blue eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Why?" She pushed herself up to a sitting position. "Because Jenkins wouldn't hire Charlotte Oliver, but he hired Charlie Oliver without hesitation." "Charlotte," he repeated, seeming to test the name. "Samuel's sister, not cousin." She nodded. "I needed the work, needed the money. Women aren't exactly welcome on cattle drives." Wade ran a hand through his wet hair, his expression still stunned. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? What the men would—" He stopped, looking back toward the river crossing in the distance. "Does anyone else know?" "No." She hesitated. "Are you going to send me back?" Wade looked at her for a long moment, then surprised her by shaking his head slowly. "No," he repeated more firmly. "But you can't keep pretending to be a man. It's too risky. Someone else will figure it out eventually." He stood, offering her his hand. "You've proven yourself these past weeks. You're a good hand, one of the best natural riders I've seen." Charlotte took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. "What are you saying?" Wade's expression softened slightly. "I'm saying ride beside me instead, as yourself, as a woman." "You can't be serious," she said incredulously. "The men won't accept that." "They will if I say they will," Wade replied with quiet authority. "It won't be easy. There'll be talk, resistance. But you've earned your place on this drive." He paused. "And I won't let talent go to waste because of foolish traditions." Charlotte stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do this?" His eyes met hers, direct and honest. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because—" He hesitated, something vulnerable briefly crossing his face. "Because I've been watching you, admiring your skill, your determination. I thought there was something different about you. Now I know what it is." A warmth spread through Charlotte's chest that had nothing to do with exertion. "What will you tell the men?" "The truth, that you're Samuel's sister, that you needed work, and that I've decided you'll finish this drive as yourself." He smiled slightly. "And that anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me." Charlotte found herself returning his smile. "Thank you." "We should get back to the herd," Wade said. There's a storm coming." He hesitated, then added softly, "Charlotte." Hearing her real name on his lips sent a shiver through her, and suddenly she realized that losing her disguise might not be the disaster she'd feared. It might be the beginning of something far more precious. But the hardest part was still ahead. Wade gathered the men while the herd grazed in a lush valley beyond the Pecos. "This is Charlotte Oliver," he announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. Charlotte stood beside him, her hair still short but no longer hidden, wearing the same clothes, but somehow appearing distinctly feminine now. "She's Samuel Oliver's sister, and she's been riding with us as Charlie." A murmur ran through the gathered cowboys. Tom's eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. That's why you reminded me of Samuel." "She joined us because she needed work," Wade continued, "and because Jenkins wouldn't hire a woman for the drive. But she's proven herself these past weeks. She can ride, rope, and work cattle as well as any man here." "That ain't the point," growled Bert Hanson, a surly cowboy who had made no secret of his distrust of Charlie from the beginning. "She lied to us. Been sleeping in our bunkhouse, watching us all the while being a—" He spat on the ground. "It ain't proper." Wade's eyes hardened. "Watch yourself, Hanson. Miss Oliver has shown nothing but respect for every man here, and from now on, she'll be treated with the same respect. She'll ride point with me and sleep at my fire, separate from the rest of you." Charlotte felt her cheeks flush at this announcement. Wade was putting his reputation on the line to protect hers. "And if we don't like it," Hanson challenged. "Then you can collect your pay and head back to Alpine," Wade said evenly. "This isn't up for debate. Charlotte stays for the remainder of the drive." Most of the men seemed to accept Wade's decision with varying degrees of resignation. Tom actually smiled and tipped his hat to Charlotte. "Always thought you were too pretty for a boy," he said with a wink. Hanson and a few others continued to grumble, but no one directly challenged Wade's authority. As the men dispersed, Charlotte turned to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But you didn't have to put yourself in this position." Wade shook his head. "I meant what I said. You've earned your place here." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "And I wouldn't feel right sending you back alone." There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. The drive continued, but with a different dynamic. Charlotte rode at Wade's side, learning the responsibilities of point position, choosing the path, setting the pace, watching for obstacles ahead. At night, she slept near Wade's bedroll, separated from the other men as promised. Some of the cowboys avoided her entirely. Others, like Tom, treated her much the same as before, perhaps with a touch more courtesy. Hanson and his friends made their disapproval known through cold stares and muttered comments, but Wade's watchful presence prevented any direct confrontation. 3 nights after her identity was revealed, Charlotte sat by the small fire Wade had built for them, a little apart from the main camp. "Coffee?" Wade offered. "Thank you." She took it gratefully. Wade settled beside her. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "The work is easier now that I don't have to pretend." "They're coming around. Tom's been talking you up to the others." They sat in comfortable silence. "Tell me about your family," Wade said finally. "Samuel mentioned them sometimes, but never in detail." Charlotte traced the rim of her cup. "There isn't much to tell. My father was a rancher, not a big spread, but enough to get by. My mother was kind, strong. She kept everything together, especially after my father started drinking." "What happened after she died?" "He lost himself in the bottle. The ranch fell into debt. Samuel left for Texas, hoping to earn enough to save the place." She sighed. "When father died, the bank took everything." Wade's expression grew distant. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a Texas Ranger. He raised me on the trail, Taught me to ride, shoot, track. A small smile touched his lips. Wasn't much for settling down. Is he still alive? No. Wade's voice was quiet. Shot by cattle rustlers near the border when I was 19. I joined a cattle drive soon after. Worked my way up. He looked at her directly. The trail became home because I didn't have one anymore. Charlotte found herself reaching out, placing her hand on his arm. I understand that feeling. Wade covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth up her arm. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Wade cleared his throat and gently withdrew his hand. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Charlotte nodded, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation, alone by the fire, sharing personal histories. But as she settled into her bedroll, she found herself watching Wade's profile against the dying firelight. She had disguised herself as a boy to join this drive, never imagining that in revealing her true identity, she might find something far more precious than wages or work. Something that looked remarkably like love. The drive continued northward. As Wade had predicted, most of the men gradually accepted Charlotte's presence, particularly as she continued to prove her worth. Crossing the Red River marked another milestone. Hansen and two of his friends collected their wages and departed to join another outfit. Their leaving seemed to ease tensions further. Never thought I'd see the day, Tom commented one evening. A woman on a cattle drive, and fitting in better than some men I've known. Wade, listening from across the fire, caught Charlotte's eye and smiled slightly. She returned the smile, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. As weeks passed and they pushed further north through Indian Territory, Charlotte found herself spending more time in Wade's company. They talked during the long hours in the saddle about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they harbored. Wade spoke of someday having his own ranch, while Charlotte confessed her love of drawing. I used to sketch the landscapes back home, she told him. It's different here, bigger. I wish I had my pencils to capture it. I'll get you new ones in Dodge, Wade said simply, as if it were the most natural promise in the world. These quiet moments were punctuated by the realities of the trail, sudden thunderstorms, a dangerous encounter with rustlers, the constant challenges of finding water and good grazing. Through it all, Charlotte worked alongside the men, earning their respect not through special treatment, but by sharing equally in the hardships. The day they crossed into Kansas, a sense of accomplishment swept through the outfit. That evening, Chuck prepared a special dinner to celebrate. As the men relaxed after the meal, someone produced a harmonica, and soon music filled the air. The mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. Charlotte sat beside Wade at the edge of the gathering, enjoying the music and the sense of community. When the harmonica player struck up a waltz, Pete turned to her with an exaggerated bow. Miss Oliver, would you do me the honor? Charlotte glanced at Wade, who nodded encouragingly. She accepted Pete's hand and let him lead her into the open space beside the fire. One by one, the other cowboys took turns dancing with her, each more awkward but earnest than the last. When the music shifted to a slower melody, the dancers paused. Your turn, boss, Tom called out, prompting murmurs of agreement. Wade hesitated, then stood and approached Charlotte. May I? He asked quietly. The moment her fingers touched his, Charlotte felt a jolt of awareness. Wade drew her into the dance with unexpected grace, his hand resting lightly at her waist. His eyes held hers as they moved to the music. I'm glad you stayed, Charlotte, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. So am I. For a few precious minutes, the hardships of the trail fell away. There was only the music, the firelight, and Wade's steady presence. When the tune finally ended, Wade's hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Charlotte knew she would remember this moment long after the drive was over. And she knew, with sudden certainty, that she was falling in love with Wade Oakley. The question was, what would happen when they reached Dodge City? The next morning, Tom fell into step beside her as she saddled her horse. "Been meaning to ask you," he said casually. "What are your plans after we reach Dodge?" Charlotte paused, realizing she hadn't given much thought to what would happen when the drive ended. "I'm not sure. I haven't really planned that far ahead." Tom nodded. "Well, if you're looking to stay on, I reckon Jenkins would be a fool not to keep you." He glanced toward where Wade was giving instructions. "And I reckon there might be other reasons to consider staying with the outfit. Don't see many people look at each other the way you two do." Before Charlotte could respond, Tom tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with thoughts she had been trying to avoid. Was it so obvious? And what could possibly come of it? These questions occupied her mind as they rode that day. Wade noticed her distraction when they stopped to water the horses. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just thinking about what happens after Dodge," Charlotte said. "The outfit would be glad to have you stay on," Wade said. "You've more than proven yourself." "And you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Would you be glad?" Wade took a step closer. "Charlotte, I—" A shout from the herd interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both turned to see one of the cowboys waving urgently. "Trouble," Wade said immediately. "Stay here." He swung onto his horse and rode toward the commotion, leaving Charlotte with the weight of unspoken words. The problem turned out to be a group of local farmers objecting to the herd passing near their land. Wade negotiated with them, and by the time the matter was settled, the moment between them had passed. The next few days brought more challenges: muddy ground, a lame horse, increasing signs of civilization. Through it all, Wade remained focused on the drive, their personal conversations seemingly forgotten. By the time the outskirts of Dodge City came into view, Charlotte had convinced herself that any deeper feelings between them had been a product of her imagination. When the drive ended, they would each go their separate ways. But she was wrong, so very wrong. The approach to Dodge brought new energy to the outfit. As they made camp for the last night on the trail, just a few miles outside the city, Wade gathered the men to give final instructions. Once they were dismissed, he approached Charlotte. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. She nodded, her heart suddenly beating faster as they moved away from camp toward a small rise. The lights of Dodge City glimmered in the distance. "It's beautiful in its way," Charlotte said. "It is," Wade agreed, turning to face her. "Charlotte, there's something I need to say before we reach Dodge." She met his gaze, her throat suddenly dry. "These past weeks, riding with you, getting to know you—" He paused, searching for words. "I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your determination, the way you see the world." Charlotte's heart hammered. "Wade, let me finish," he said gently. "I find myself not wanting this drive to end because it means no longer seeing you every day." "I feel the same," she admitted. Wade took her hand. "I don't have much to offer. The life of a trail boss isn't easy or settled. But whatever I do have, whatever I am, I'd like to share it with you, if you'll have me." Charlotte looked up at him, this man who had discovered her secret and chosen to protect rather than expose her. "I disguised myself as a boy to join this drive," she said softly. "And you said, ride beside me instead. I think I'd like to keep riding beside you, Wade Oakley, for as long as you'll have me." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features. He drew her closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I?" Charlotte nodded, and Wade lowered his lips to hers. His arms encircled her waist, and she leaned into him, feeling as though she had finally found home. When they parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Charlotte Oliver. I think I have since the moment you rode that impossible horse." Charlotte laughed softly. "And I love you, Wade Oakley." "Jenkins has offered me a partnership in a new venture," Wade said. "Breeding horses on land he's purchased near Alpine. It would mean less time on the trail, more time building something permanent." "That sounds wonderful," Charlotte said. "It would be, with you beside me." Wade took both her hands. "I want to do this properly. When we reach Dodge, I'd like to speak to the minister there, if you're willing." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I believe I am, Charlotte Oliver, though I'm making a poor job of it without a ring." "Your words are perfect," she assured him. "And yes, I will marry you." Relief and joy spread across Wade's face. He pulled her into another kiss, this one filled with promise and certainty. When they finally broke apart, the lights of Dodge City seemed to shine brighter, beckoning them toward their future. Hand in hand, they walked back to camp. Tomorrow would bring new beginnings, not just the end of a drive, but the start of a journey neither had anticipated. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Wade asked. Charlotte smiled up at him. "With you beside me, always." The next morning dawned clear and bright. The outfit moved with efficiency, getting the herd to the stockyards before midday. Once the cattle were secured, Wade distributed the pay. There were handshakes all around. Tom approached Charlotte. "Well, Miss Oliver, it's been an education riding with you." Charlotte shook his hand warmly. "Thank you for everything, Tom." He glanced toward Wade. "Be happy, both of you. The trail's a hard life, but it's easier with the right person beside you." After the men had departed, Wade returned to Charlotte's side. "I've taken a room for you at the Dodge House. Thought you might appreciate some privacy." "Thank you," Charlotte said, touched by his consideration. "I'm at the same hotel, different floor. Propriety must be maintained, at least until we speak with the minister." He smiled. "I've also arranged for some things to be sent to your room, proper clothes and such." "That's very kind." "Keep your trail clothes too," Wade added. "They suit you." At the hotel, Charlotte found a copper bathtub already filled with steaming water and several packages on the bed. She soaked until the water cooled, thinking about the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Inside the packages, she found several dresses, undergarments, boots, and even hairpins. The final package held a simple blue dress of fine cotton. She put it on, marveling at how strange it felt after so long. She studied herself in the mirror, running a hand through her still short hair. It suited her now, a physical reminder of her journey and the strength she had discovered. At 6, Charlotte made her way to the hotel dining room. Wade stood as she approached, his eyes widening appreciatively. "Charlotte, you look beautiful." "Thank you." Wade held her chair, then took his seat. "I spoke with the minister this afternoon. He's agreed to marry us tomorrow, if that's not too soon." "Not too soon at all." "I also sent a telegraph to Jenkins," Wade said, taking her hand, "accepting his offer of partnership." They talked through dinner, making plans for their future. When they finally left the dining room, Wade walked Charlotte to the foot of the stairs. "I'll meet you here at 10 tomorrow morning," he said. "The minister is expecting us at 11. "Wade, are you certain about this? It's all happening so quickly." Wade took her hand, his expression serious. "Charlotte Oliver, I've spent the last 10 years making split-second decisions that could mean life or death on the trail. I've never been more certain of anything than I am of you." He raised her hand to his lips. "But if you need more time—" "No," she interrupted. "I don't need more time." "Then I'll see you in the morning." That night Charlotte slept in a real bed, her dreams filled with open skies and Wade's blue eyes. Morning brought butterflies and a sense of rightness. She dressed in the finest of the new clothes, a cream-colored dress with subtle embroidery. When she descended to the lobby, she found not only Wade waiting, but also Tom and several other members of the outfit. "I hope you don't mind," Wade said. "They wanted to be there." Tom approached with a small bouquet of prairie flowers. "Thought you might want these, Miss Oliver." "Thank you, Tom," she said, deeply touched. Wade offered his arm, and together they walked to the small church. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the minister declared them man and wife, Wade's kiss was gentle yet firm, a promise sealed. Outside the church, the Cowboys erupted in cheers. Tom organized an impromptu guard of honor, and someone threw rice with enthusiastic aim. "Congratulations, Mrs. Oakley," Tom said, pumping Wade's hand. The celebration continued at a local restaurant. There was food, drink, and laughter as the men recounted tales from the drive. Charlotte found herself laughing and blushing in equal measure. As the afternoon wore on, Wade leaned close. "Ready to slip away? I have one more surprise." They made their farewells and stepped into the late afternoon sunlight. "Close your eyes," Wade instructed. Charlotte complied, letting him guide her down the street. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in front of a shop displaying art supplies, and prominently featured was a beautiful set of drawing pencils. "You remembered," she breathed. "Of course I did. Every word you've ever said to me." The simplicity of the gesture moved Charlotte deeply. Inside, she selected pencils, a leather-bound sketchbook, and other supplies. That night, in what was now their shared room, Charlotte discovered another aspect of love with the man who had first discovered her secret, and then her heart. Their coming together was tender and passionate, marked by mutual respect. The next morning, Wade watched her sleep. "What are you thinking?" she asked when she woke. "That I'm the luckiest man in Kansas." Charlotte laughed. "I think I'm the lucky one. Not many women disguise themselves as men and end up married to the most handsome trail boss on the frontier." Wade chuckled. "When you put it that way, we do have quite a story." "Our children will never believe it," Charlotte mused, then blushed. Wade's expression grew tender. "You want children?" she nodded. "Someday, when we're settled. Sons as brave as their mother, daughters as strong." The picture he painted filled Charlotte with hope. They spent 3 more days in Dodge completing business. Several of the outfit would be returning with them, including Tom. The journey back to Texas was less arduous, and along the way, Charlotte used her new sketchbook to capture scenes, and occasionally, when he wasn't aware, Wade himself. When they finally reached Alpine in late October, the town looked different. No longer a place of desperate opportunity, but the beginning of a future full of promise. Jenkins received them at his office. "Can't say I saw this coming," he admitted. "But I can't fault Wade's judgment. If you're half as good with horses as your brother was with cattle, Mrs. Oakley, this partnership will be a success." The horse breeding operation was on beautiful grazing land with a year-round creek and mountain views. A small house had been built. "It's perfect," Charlotte declared. "Exactly what I pictured." "It'll be a lot of work," Wade said, slipping an arm around her waist. "Good thing you have a wife who isn't afraid of hard work," Charlotte replied with a smile. "Or of disguising herself to get a job done," Wade laughed. "Best disguise that ever failed." Over the following months, they threw themselves into creating their new life. The horse operation grew steadily, Charlotte's eye for good bloodlines proving invaluable. They built a comfortable home with wide porches and large windows for the sweeping views Charlotte loved to sketch. Tom stayed with them, taking on the role of foreman and becoming an uncle figure. The following spring brought news that filled their lives with even greater joy. Charlotte was expecting their first child. In December of 1876, just over a year after their wedding, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Samuel Wade Oakley in honor of the brother, whose tragic death had inadvertently brought them together. "He has your eyes," Charlotte told Wade as they gazed at their newborn. "And your determination," Wade replied. Tom, granted the honorary title of grandfather, was besotted. "Going to teach him everything I know." Life settled into a rhythm. As the years passed, the Oakley Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout Texas for its quality horses. Charlotte and Wade welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1878, and another son, Thomas, in 1881. Charlotte never again had to disguise herself. Instead, she became known in her own right as a skilled horsewoman and shrewd businessperson. Women from neighboring ranches often sought her advice, and more than one young girl declared she wanted to be just like Mrs. Oakley. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Wade surprised Charlotte with a gift, a beautiful leather saddle hand-tooled with her initials and decorated with silver. "For the best rider I've ever known," he said, "and the best partner a man could ask for." Charlotte ran her hands over the craftsmanship, deeply moved. "It's beautiful. Thank you." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing, looking out over the ranch. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't discovered my secret that day on the Pecos?" Charlotte asked. Wade considered the question. "I like to think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Some things are just meant to be. Like a woman disguising herself as a boy to join a cattle drive. Like a trail boss finding the love of his life where he least expected it," Wade corrected, kissing her temple. Charlotte smiled, thinking of the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From her desperate arrival in Alpine with nothing but a small trunk, to the life they had built together. It hadn't always been easy, but it had always been right. "I'm glad I took that chance," she said softly. Wade's arm tightened around her. "Ride beside me instead. Best decision I ever made." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues that Charlotte would later capture in her sketchbook, they sat in contented silence. The woman who had once disguised herself as a boy, and the man who had seen through to her true self, partners in every sense, riding side by side through whatever life brought their way. If you loved Charlotte and Wade's incredible journey from deception to devotion, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Their story proves that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. What would you have done in Charlotte's situation? Would you have taken the same chance? Drop your answer in the comments below and check out our next story about another woman who refused to let society's rules hold her back. Until next time, keep chasing your dreams, no matter how wild they seem.